The story starts on a crowded airplane. Passengers are busy settling into their seats, chatting, and stuffing luggage into the overhead compartments. Among them is a sharply dressed businessman who checks his seat assignment and frowns deeply. He's clearly not happy to find himself in economy class, surrounded by what he considers ordinary people. His irritation only grows when he notices the person seated next to him, a quiet man dressed casually in a black hoodie and jeans, sitting calmly by the window. The man has long hair tucked behind his ears and a peaceful expression, blending in with the rest of the passengers. Nothing about him suggests wealth or status. The businessman sneers, unable to hide his disdain. He leans over to the man and says with a smirk, "Economy class, huh? Guess life's not going too well for you." The man simply smiles back, his expression calm and unreadable. The businessman doesn't stop there. He keeps throwing sly, condescending remarks at the man, assuming he's just an ordinary traveler. What he doesn't know is that the person he's mocking is not only far more successful and wealthy than him, but also someone known for his humility and kindness. What happens next will surprise everyone on the plane. The cabin is filled with the usual pre-flight buzz. Flight attendants help passengers with their carry-ons, and the faint hum of the air conditioner creates a soothing background noise. Among the crowd, Keanu Reeves sits quietly by the window, unnoticed. His simple black hoodie and jeans make him look like just another traveler, his calm demeanor blending in effortlessly. Meanwhile, across the aisle, a businessman in his mid-40s shoves his expensive briefcase into the overhead bin. He's dressed in a sharp suit, wearing a flashy watch that seems to scream for attention. Glancing at his boarding pass again, his face twists in frustration when he realizes he's stuck in economy class. "Great. Just great," he mutters loudly enough for others to hear. The businessman plops into his seat with a loud sigh, his irritation written all over his face. Without giving Keanu more than a passing glance, he pulls out his phone and begins scrolling furiously. "Should have upgraded my ticket," he mutters under his breath. When a flight attendant walks by, he waves her over dramatically. "Excuse me," he says in an exaggerated tone, "isn't there any way I can move to business class? I don't belong back here with this." He gestures dismissively at the passengers around him. The flight attendant smiles politely but firmly. "I'm sorry, sir, but business class is full." The businessman groans, leaning back in his seat. "Figures," he mutters. Finally, he turns to Keanu, who's gazing out the window, lost in thought. "You're awfully quiet," he says, his voice dripping with mockery. "Let me guess. You're used to this, huh? Flying economy, living paycheck to paycheck?" Keanu turns to him, calm and unbothered. "Something like that," he replies softly, his tone kind and steady. Encouraged by what he thinks is weakness, the businessman smirks. "Yeah, I figured. You've got that struggling artist vibe. Let me give you some advice. Spend less time dreaming and more time working. Maybe one day, you'll make it to business class." A few passengers nearby glance over, their faces showing discomfort and curiosity. But Keanu stays composed, giving the businessman a small smile. "Thanks for the advice," he says simply. The businessman leans back, clearly pleased with himself. He pulls out his phone and begins a loud conversation about his career. "Yeah, the deal's going through. Of course, I'm the one closing it. Some people have what it takes, and some people are just, well, stuck where they are." As the plane prepares for takeoff, Keanu notices a nervous young boy sitting across the aisle with his mother. The boy grips the armrest tightly, his eyes wide with fear. Keanu leans forward, catching the boy's eye, and offers a gentle smile. He even hands the boy a pack of gum from his pocket, showing him how to chew it to help with the pressure in his ears during takeoff. The businessman notices and scoffs. What are you, a babysitter now? You really do belong back here. Keanu doesn't respond this time. Instead, he focuses on the boy, whose tense shoulders slowly start to relax. As the plane lifted off, passengers exchanged knowing looks, some shaking their heads at the businessman's arrogance. His smugness only grew. This is why I usually avoid flights like this, he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Too many people with no ambition, no drive. Keanu, still silent, turned back to the window, a faint smile playing on his lips. Little did the businessman know that the quiet man he was mocking was about to teach him, and the entire cabin, a lesson they would never forget. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the cabin settled into a calm hum. The businessman, now more relaxed, flipped through a glossy magazine filled with luxury ads. As he casually glanced over at Keanu, still seated peacefully by the window, he couldn't hide his confusion. "You're really something," he said with a chuckle. Sitting there all zen-like, perfectly okay with this mediocrity. Keanu turned to him, his gaze warm and steady. "Happiness doesn't come from where you sit," he said gently. "It comes from how you see things." The businessman scoffed and rolled his eyes. Spoken like someone who doesn't have much to be happy about. "Let me guess, you're one of those it's the journey, not the destination types." Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering the words. "Something like that," he replied, his tone as calm as ever. The response seemed to irritate the businessman even more. Across the aisle, the young boy Keanu had comforted earlier leaned toward his mother. "Mom, that man looks familiar," he whispered. His mother gave a polite smile and gently shushed him, but the boy's curiosity was piqued. He kept sneaking glances at Keanu, trying to figure out where he had seen him before. Meanwhile, the businessman launched into another loud monologue, this time directing his comments to a woman sitting behind him. "This is the problem these days," he said, his voice dripping with self-importance. "People are too comfortable being average. No ambition, no drive. Back in my day, we worked hard to get ahead." The woman gave him a curt smile, clearly uninterested, but he was undeterred. Turning back to Keanu, he asked, "What do you do, anyway?" His tone was laced with condescension. Keanu paused, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I do a bit of acting," he said modestly. The businessman snorted. "Acting, huh? That explains it. No offense, but it's not exactly a stable career, is it? Let me guess, you've done a few commercials? Maybe some community theater?" Keanu's smile didn't waver. "Something like that." The businessman leaned back in his seat, shaking his head. "You know, I don't mean to be harsh," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But if you haven't made it big by now, maybe it's time to move on. Find something more practical." Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around the cabin, his eyes landing on the young boy, who was still staring at him intently. Keanu gave him a small wave, and the boy beamed, nudging his mother again. "Mom, I know who he is." "That's the guy from the movies," the boy exclaimed. The mother glanced over, her eyes widening as she suddenly recognized Keanu. She quickly hushed her son, but it was too late. The boy's excitement had caught the attention of nearby passengers. The businessman frowned, looking between the boy and Keanu. "Movies," he repeated, narrowing his eyes. "Wait, you're saying this guy is some kind of actor?" Keanu's smile widened slightly, but he said nothing. The other passengers began whispering among themselves, some pulling out their phones to confirm the boy's claim. A murmur of excitement rippled through the cabin as more people recognized him. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" someone whispered. "I think it is," another passenger exclaimed. "I saw him in that action movie, he's incredible." The businessman's confident smirk faltered. He glanced back at Keanu, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible uncertainty. Wait, you're not really him, are you? Keanu leaned back in his seat, his calm demeanor unshaken. I told you, he said simply. I do a bit of acting. The businessman's face turned red as realization dawned. He had spent the entire flight mocking one of the most respected and beloved figures in Hollywood, completely unaware of who he was talking to. The passengers around them, now fully engaged, watched the scene with a mix of amusement and awe. Keanu, however, showed no resentment. Instead, he turned to the businessman with a kind smile. You were saying something about ambition, he asked gently. The businessman opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. The tables had turned, and the lesson was only just beginning. Earlier, the businessman had been full of himself. I was just making conversation, he mumbled, almost as if trying to excuse his earlier comments. Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying the man with quiet intensity. It's interesting how our tone changes when we think someone has more value than we assumed, he said calmly, his words carrying a quiet weight. The businessman swallowed hard, the impact of Keanu's words sinking in. Around them, passengers murmured in agreement, some shooting disapproving looks at the businessman. A young woman leaned over from her seat. You know, I think it's pretty cool that someone as big as Keanu Reeves is sitting here with us in economy. Shows he's down to earth. Another passenger nodded. Exactly. He's probably one of the nicest guys in Hollywood, and here you are treating him like dirt. The businessman held up his hands defensively. I didn't know, okay? I didn't mean anything by it. Keanu, ever composed, smiled gently. It's not about me, he said, his voice calm yet firm. It's about how we treat people in general. Titles and appearances shouldn't dictate respect. Everyone deserves kindness. The cabin fell silent. Keanu's words resonated deeply with the passengers. Even the flight attendants paused in their tasks, subtly listening to the exchange. The young boy from earlier, emboldened by the quiet, called out, You're my hero, Mr. Reeves. Keanu turned to the boy and smiled warmly. Thank you, buddy. That means a lot. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notebook and pen, scribbled something down, and handed it to the boy. The boy's face lit up as he read the note, Always be kind, no matter what. The businessman watched the interaction, his earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of regret. Clearing his throat awkwardly, he said, Listen, Mr. Reeves. I think I owe you an apology. Keanu raised a hand to stop him. You don't owe me anything, he said gently. But if you really mean that, maybe use this moment as a chance to reflect. Treat others with the same respect you'd want for yourself. That's all. The businessman nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Around them, passengers smiled and whispered, clearly impressed by Keanu's grace and humility. The earlier tension in the cabin was replaced by a sense of warmth and camaraderie. The businessman hesitated for a moment before speaking again. For what it's worth, you're right, he admitted, his tone genuine. I've been so caught up in my own success that I've forgotten how to just be decent. I'll do better. Keanu nodded, his smile kind. That's all anyone can do. As the plane continued its journey, the businessman sat quietly, lost in thought. Around him, passengers chatted about the unexpected encounter, their admiration for Keanu evident. For the businessman, however, this was more than just a chance meeting, it was a turning point. Later, the young boy stood up, holding the note Keanu had given him. Excuse me, he said loudly, his voice breaking the quiet hum of the cabin. I just want to say, Mr. Reeves is the coolest person I've ever met. A ripple of laughter spread through the cabin, but the boy wasn't done. And what he said about being kind, it's true. My mom always tells me that. She says we should treat everyone the same, no matter what. His mother smiled warmly, giving her son a gentle pat on the back. That's right, sweetheart. Keanu turned to the boy, his smile widening. You've got a smart mom. Listen to her. The businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the weight of the lesson. Finally, he turned to Keanu. Look, I was way out of line earlier, he said, his voice quieter now. I've been so focused on appearances, on trying to prove something, but the truth is, you're right. Respect shouldn't depend on what someone looks like or where they're sitting. It should just be there. Keanu nodded, his expression understanding. It takes a lot to admit when we're wrong, he said. That's the first step to doing better. The businessman sighed. I've got a lot to learn, but this has been a wake-up call. Keanu offered him a small smile. We're all learning, every day. As the plane began its descent, the atmosphere in the cabin had noticeably shifted. Conversations flowed more freely, smiles were exchanged, and passengers who had barely acknowledged one another before were now chatting like old friends. Keanu's presence had not only changed the businessman's attitude but had also brought a sense of unity to the entire flight. The young boy leaned across the aisle toward Keanu. Mr. Reeves, can I ask you something? Of course, Keanu replied, his tone warm and inviting. How do you stay so nice when people are mean to you? The boy's innocent curiosity caught the attention of nearby passengers. Keanu smiled thoughtfully. That's a good question, he said. I guess I try to remember that everyone's going through something. Sometimes people aren't really mad at you, they're just mad at life. If you can meet anger with kindness, you might just make their day a little better. The boy nodded slowly, absorbing every word. His mother smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. The businessman cleared his throat. That's a powerful way to look at things, he admitted. I wish I'd learned that sooner. Keanu turned to him, his expression kind. It's never too late to start, he said simply. As the plane touched down and passengers gathered their belongings, the businessman hesitated. Turning to Keanu one last time, he said, I know I've apologized already, but I really want to thank you. Not just for your words, but for how you handled everything. You've given me a lot to think about. Keanu nodded, his smile never wavering. The best way to show gratitude is to pass it on. Treat others the way you'd want to be treated. As the passengers exited the plane, a small crowd gathered in the terminal, excited to see Keanu. He took the time to greet each fan with genuine warmth before leaving. The young boy and his mother approached Keanu one last time. The boy handed him a small piece of paper he had scribbled on during the flight. This is for you, he said shyly. Keanu unfolded the paper and read the words, Thank you for being kind. I'll try to be kind, too. Keanu's face lit up with a smile, and he crouched down to meet the boy's gaze. You already are, he said warmly. As Keanu walked away, the businessman stood frozen, watching him disappear into the crowd. He realized that this encounter had changed him, not just in how he saw Keanu, but in how he viewed life. For the first time in years, he felt inspired to be better. Life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. And for everyone on that flight, Keanu Reeves had done more than just share his presence, he had shared a lesson in kindness, humility, and connection.